Hi everyone, welcome to the Car Chat podcast, and today I'm here with Sam Bailey. Hello.
Morning.
Good morning. Can you tell the listeners a little bit about where we are and who you are and what you do, just as a short little summary?
Yeah, sure. So we're here at the SL shop, which we're a classic Mercedes specialist, focused on SLs, as the name would suggest. We're here just outside of Stratford-upon-Avon, where we've been based for the past 6 years, the second location that we've had, and we are a team of 52 people, and we buy and sell, service and restore, and sell parts for predominantly classic SLs, Pagoda SL, 107 SL and 129 SL, so from the 60s through to the late 90s, that's our sweet spot.
Right. No, okay, we'll definitely break down what those are, because I know what an SL is as a broad thing, but I've not gone to the level of model codes. I think I'm slowly starting to pick it up, but exactly, we will point at something and go, what is that? What's exact spec change? Has it got the right lights and all that sort of stuff? But so where did this journey begin? Have you been involved in cars for a long time? Tell me about it.
So it was a hobby turned into a business. So I'm old enough to remember when Auto Trader was a printed publication that came out on a Friday, and when I was at school, of course, in the 80s, I'd be at the back of the class with the Auto Trader, and there was always a classic section. It was only a couple of pages of the whole magazine, but I was always into cars. My father was a mechanic by trade, did his apprenticeship with Mercedes, so I was around Mercedes Benz a lot back in the era, yeah. I sort of left school, went into retail, went into sales, worked in insurance, but cars were always a hobby. I was always kind of buying and selling cars, and the real trigger came when companies stopped providing company cars and provided cash instead. Because in the sort of 90s and early noughties, everybody of a certain kind of job had a company car, and then they decided to give cash instead. And the company I worked for, there was no restriction on the kind of car you had. So at the time, I was driving an SL as my company car, which is funded by me, and turning up to client meetings with an SL, and of course you end up having more conversation about the car than you do about business, but that's cars, isn't it?
Was that seen as like a positive thing or a negative thing?
For sure, mostly positive. There were some people that obviously didn't get it and whatever else, and my bosses at the time realised that I was driving a 20-year-old car and I should have been driving a 2-year-old car or something like that, but so that kind of triggered it. And then two kind of things happened. I reached the top of where I wanted to be in the sort of corporate ladder, and had enough of the nonsense that brings. And my father at the time was ready to sort of early retire from the role he was in. So 1 or 2 cars around me turned into 6 or 8 cars around me, and then my father was sort of tinkering around, helping me get them running and selling them the way that we needed to sell them. We used eBay back in the day. We were certainly not the value of cars that we have now, but we loved it, and it was great thing to do. So a hobby then turned into my day job, and I quit that day job with the large corporate. I was working for Prudential at the time down in London, saved me commuting down on the train from Worcestershire, and set up in a small unit based on a farm about 10 miles down the road, and that was 15 years ago now. From there, I realised that there was a potential niche opportunity with the 107 SL. That's the sort of Bobby Ewing shaped square car from 71 to 89. The SL known as a 107 SL, and I realised there was a potential opportunity to be a specialist in those. So started to build knowledge and experience around those. One of my first employees was Bruce Greetham, and he was the Mercedes-Benz club official for the local area, so managed to persuade him to come and work for us. He's now a director of the business. And we took on a couple of really good local mechanics. So at that time we were just buying and selling cars and doing a bit of prep for our showroom at the time, which was a farm shed. And then we started to do a little bit of servicing, and then that turned into restoration. And because Bruce's background, he'd been a concourse winner and a concourse judge himself, he'd got a real eye for detail. So we found that club members and the communities, the Mercedes community, were bringing their cars to us to be serviced and eventually restored. So we kind of grew from 2 to 5 to 10 employees. And then, of course, we needed a full-time parts guy who was finding these difficult-to-find parts for us for the workshop. And then we began to sell parts on the internet. So there's quite a few remanufacturers of parts. You can buy, original spec and equipment service parts, so Bosch distributor caps, for example, and those kind of things. So we went from servicing our own workshop to servicing retail customers and started with a small web shop. Here we are, second location, 15 years later with 52 employees and 10 million turnover. So
it's grown quite substantially.
Yeah.
Has that, you said that you got involved with Mercedes Club, and has that been a sort of key part definitely over the early years of cementing yourselves as the place or a good place? Being involved with the clubs, has that been helpful?
It's a double-edged sword. In the early days, it definitely was, because it plugged us into some clients early on, and Bruce had got credibility with the club. But I guess the advent of the internet, but as the internet has grown and allowed companies like mine to market their products and services and provide images and video and that kind of thing, we were less reliant on the sort of club as a source of custom than we are now. And of course, there are aspects of the club that don't always fit with a commercial business, and certain people within the club don't necessarily want the club to be too associated with a commercial entity like ourselves. So whilst we've both got the same objective, we want people to enjoy these cars, we want people to take them on trips and to use them as much as possible, and that's exactly what the club want as well. They're careful that we're not too in their pocket, or they're in our pocket, or whatever it might be. So it was worthwhile in the early days, but actually as time's gone on, we've probably distanced ourselves a little bit from the club.
I find that whether it's various sort of forums or whatever, as someone that creates content, and I imagine it's the same if you've got a business, prior to the business and prior to me making videos, I was massively passionate and was on forums and stuff. Slightly less so now, but and then when I started doing something outside of that, I wanted to talk about it, ask people about it, bring things up, and then immediately the administrators come in and you can't sell your stuff. And I'm what? People legit start these threads. It's a legit thread. Yeah. Yes, I happen to have some stuff in the background, but people don't have to read it. And then you end up with this weird, no, this is my space, not your space dynamic. Exactly,
And the club's still, trying to work out what it is now. What the club was in the 70s, 80s and 90s is not what I think people want from an owner's club now. So they've got their own job to do there on defining what the club is for their club members. Yeah, interesting you say about the forums. I don't go on them anymore at all, because it's normally people that are misinformed. It's normally, some keyboard warrior that's probably sat in his underpants somewhere in his spare bedroom of his mum's house, making comments about my business. They've never been here, they've never seen us, so I don't tend to go on the forums. Or we've got a few competitors, of course, who we've maybe reduced the amount of business that they've got nowadays, so they're a bit grumpy with us. But
they've got a bit of an axe to grind. And also, I guess, a lot of the reason most people go, well, I don't know particularly why most people go on forums, but as in they're looking for a bit of information. Yeah. If you have a network or a team of experts in your field, then you just contact them directly and you know exactly who the person is. It's verified. I remember particularly bad one. I had an M2 and I was doing track days, and I just wanted to, I was like, the forum is the perfect place to ask this. Now I realised it's not. Was I just want to I want to do something to the brakes. Has anyone done anything to their brakes? And then I just got 5 people telling me to learn to drive. They drive their car at X location. I'd been to a Bedford track day, and the brakes lasted a lap. And so I got told to go back to school. I was driving the car wrong. If you drive it around the Nürburgring, it's not an issue. And all this sort of stuff. And I was like...
Everyone's an expert.
Yeah, I was like... And then someone was like, oh, I just had a look. This guy does a shit ton of track days, does some racing. It's possibly not learn to drive. Might be. I'm sure we can all drive better.
Yeah.
And then, I just thought it was quite funny that's like the stereotypical stuff that you think happens.
And now you've got WhatsApp groups as well, so you've got another layer again. I recently bought an E39 M5, which is a car that I've always loved ever since they were new. So finally managed to get one just before the prices go stratospheric, and joined this WhatsApp group. So joined the 4 members, ended up in this WhatsApp group. Oh my word, the nonsense that was just, and I actually just deleted myself after 24 hours. I just deleted myself from it because I just thought, I just want to know what suspension to get. Somebody tell me what shocks to put on it.
So you're not dedicated just Mercedes. I'm only repping Mercedes then.
Well, don't tell anyone. But I do love my BMWs. I love old BMWs. Yeah. Actually, I mean, for me, the sweet spot of cars are the 90s. Right. That is when I think we've got vehicles that aren't too controlled by electronics and diagnostic stuff. Yeah. They're not nannying you too much, and yet you've got real feel. You've got real analog driving feel, and I think after that I start to lose interest. So some of the best cars I've owned have been cars from that era.
And do you think that relates to your age and a time in life when they came out?
Yes, I think there's an element of that. I think there's that. I think just the general quality of the cars, I think, were right about that time. And for me, I'm a keen driver like you. I've done a little bit of racing, so I appreciate a car that I can feel that's not telling me that I've gone over a white line or trying to brake for me or telling me I'm too close to the car in front and all that sort of stuff. So that stuff gets right up my nose. So those cars in the 90s, and you've got proper noise and... Yeah,
absolutely. And with Mercedes, I've heard this from somewhere, that people talk about there was an era when the cars were, I don't think necessarily built better, is necessarily the right way to describe it, but built to last a lot longer. Yeah. Is that? For sure, yeah. And it's the time when they connected with Chrysler, and for whatever reason, the purpose of Mercedes-Benz was always engineering first, and then for whatever reason the accountants probably came to town and got more involved, the tie-up with Chrysler and the need for profit over quality. And you can actually see it, in the cars that we specialise in, the 129. So they were made from 89 to 2002. Right. You can see the quality dip. You can see the early cars in the late 80s are absolutely of amazing quality. The leather is beautiful, the panels are amazing, and then you can see those cars to the end of the production. The leather's completely different, the interior trim is completely different, the quality of the metals are different. And there's some, when you look at what Mercedes went through at that era, the E-Class, for example, I think it's the 210 E-Class, they just rusted in front of your eyes. And I think Mercedes were changing roofs and doors and amazing panels under warranty. And I think any company that didn't have the financial depth that they've got probably would have gone bust. That's interesting. That's probably a good point to sort of run through the different models. Yep. So can we just do a quick, doesn't have to be quick, but run through the SLs from sort of beginning to now, or now-ish, or, Yeah. So SL stands for Sports Light or Sports Licht, which was the Mercedes' idea at creating a sports car at the time, a two-door or a roadster convertible, call it what you will. So it was born really with the sort of 300 SL, and then of course you ended up with the Gullwing and the roadster version of that. Yeah. Following that, it went to a 190 SL. That's a 4-cylinder car, and then in '63, that's when the shape known as the Pagoda or the W113. That's where our specialism starts. Okay. So you've got those couple of models in the '50s that were really the birth of what the SL is. Yeah. But really, from a mass production side of things, it was 190 SL, and then in particular Pagoda SL, and they realised that the American market was going to help them shift some metal. There was a lot of importance placed on what the Americans felt was going to be a car for their market. So the Pagoda SL ran from 63 to 71 in 3 engine variants. It started with a 230 6-cylinder, went to a 250 6-cylinder, and then ended with a 280 6-cylinder. Most of them were autos, a few manuals in the early days. So that model then finished in 71, and that's when the 107 came out. And that really was a car, probably focused on the American market as much as the European and the rest of the world. I think it was the longest running body shape
for Mercedes-Benz, other than the G-Wagon, of course, which is still around now in whatever form. But 18-year production of the 107 SL.
That's mental.
Yeah, 8 or 9 different engine variants, a couple of 6-cylinders, V8s. Left and right hand drive, almost all automatic, very few manuals, I think, in all the years, in all the 15 years and the many hundreds that we've had pass through here. You know, you can probably count manuals on your hand, sort of thing.
And are they quite sought after now? Or
no, they don't seem to be at all. Whenever we get one in and we put one in the showroom, we think it could be interesting because it's fairly unique, but it doesn't seem to get any attention. And in fact, they take quite a while to sell. Mercedes weren't brilliant at making manual gearboxes. You know, there's a long throw. It's like stirring a rice pudding in some of them, I think. So they're not the sweetest manual gearboxes to use anyway.
Yeah.
So that was the 107, which finished in 89. And interestingly, in 89, they were still in really high demand. You were still on a waiting list. You still had to know somebody in a Mercedes garage to get one of those, even right at the end of production.
Did it go almost the opposite? When it came out, was it a super popular car?
Yes, very much so,
just bump all the way through.
Yeah. And bear in mind, when Pagodas came out, you could buy 2 E-Types for the price of a new Pagoda.
Wow.
So it gives you an example of how, expensive and well-engineered these cars were. So then the 129 came out, which is a completely different leap again in terms of how it drives, electronics that were used. And you can see that must have been an absolute revelation when that came out in 89. Ferociously expensive. I think they were like 80 odd thousand pounds at launch, when you could buy a nice detached 5-bedroom house in the suburbs for that at that time. So they were for the wealthy. They were often used as sort of directors' or directors' wives' cars. And then of course with the 129 you're getting a few more creature comforts now. So you're getting a power hood, power seats, those kind of things, whereas that wasn't an option on 107.
And at the time, presumably that tech wasn't massively available on other cars?
No. So all those things that Mercedes are synonymous for, airbags and those kind of things, they were coming through in the SL as well. They've got that automatic roll bar, so there are some sensors underneath each of the rear wheels. When as soon as it detects the car's going to roll over, it pops the roll bar up. That was a feature.
If that pops up, is that game over for the car?
No, not at all. No, you can reset it and pop it back down. So,
does it get to
it makes you jump.
yeah.
Change of underwear when it pops up, I can tell you that.
Not got your arm behind your head,
exactly,
just scratching it.
Yeah.
I guess, and going back a little bit with the manual gearbox, I guess, is that more, do you think, one, whether it was necessarily a good gearbox or not, but the sort of style of car? For me, an SL is like cruising South France, wherever, somewhere warm, with some luggage, kids maybe, or as I've seen in Monaco many times, lots of women. That's the vibe.
Correct, and that still is now, and I guess it was then and it still is now, which is probably why they're not very popular. There's a few drivers out there that that are interested, and we ourselves do a 6-speed conversion, but that's a different gearbox completely, a different Borg-Warner unit with a much nicer throw, and at the same time we're often changing the diff settings to make sure that the final drive ratio is quite nice for cruising, as well as if you want to drive them more enthusiastically, we're doing that, but that's a whole different.
Yeah, well, let's definitely get into that. So what is it? R107, R129.
Yep. And then we went to 230, R230. So that was the ones with the folding roof, the sort of twin lamp at the front era, so 2002 onwards. And that's when well, for me anyway, be familiar with like the 55 AMG. So that first shape that came out. Fantastic car, very well made. Very nice to own, very nice to drive. A few gremlins with those, so rear boot seals didn't fit properly even when they were new and allow water to get into the rear boot and bugger up various components such as the roof module and the pump, and that's quite an expensive thing to fix. And so it went from that, and then a facelift, I think the 231 or 232, where they sort of got a bit more chiseled, and then you're getting into that AMG era then where they started putting all the different engines in, eventually with the 4.4 engine and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, big V12s.
Yeah, V12s and V8, twin turbo V8s and stuff like that. Huge horsepower, not the most nimble on their toes, but enormous horsepower.
Yes. And that sort of type of car, like my sort of reference might be, modern AMG, and you've got similar car to myself. You've got an E63, and for a while I just didn't understand kind of why those cars exist. Like, why can you buy from Mercedes, whatever it is, but with a V12 or something in it? Like, that makes no sense whatsoever. But then you go to Europe, you go to Germany, and you start to go, I see why companies like AMG came out and start putting massive power. Because you can go as fast as you like.
Yeah. And you're sat on the Autobahn at whatever speed thinking you're going fast.
Yeah.
Somebody comes past you with one hand on the wheel, sipping a cup of cappuccino or something like that, and you think, okay, here we are.
Yeah, definitely one of the weirdest experience, I think, in a car is going past a police car on an Autobahn when you're doing whatever, 150 or something. You're just like, how is this allowed?
But you've got to keep on your toes, haven't you? Because there's certain sections where you can't do that and certain sections when you can. So you've got to keep on your toes.
Yeah, you do. Well, so with the varying levels of electronics coming in the SLs, is there a certain sort of time where it becomes a pain because they're getting older now? Or actually, are they reasonably okay even all the way up to the 2000s?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's not just electronics. Actually, it's some of the mechanical components as well. So what we're finding is, with sticking with electronics, there are a lot of control modules that control various aspects of let's say a 129, the roof, for example. We can have those refurbished now. So there's some clever, very geeky people that take them to pieces and fix all the anodes and whatever else it is that they do. And so we can get those repaired. There are certain aspects of the diagnostic system that you need a specialist tool to get to the bottom of to diagnose, and there are some ferociously complicated components of the 600, that's the V12 129, that do take quite some looking into. There are some basic things that Mercedes are renowned for from that era as well. So they used biodegradable sheathing on the wiring limbs. And what's happened now is, of course, that's degrading, and the sheathing is exposing the wires, and you're getting short circuits. So you're actually getting cars that run rough, run lumpy, misfire, whatever else. Or you just simply go to change the plugs, you take the coil packs out, you disturb that wiring loom that's not been disturbed for a long time, and then all of a sudden you now need a wiring loom. So you do have, this kind of knock-on effects. Let's remember that these cars were complex and expensive when new, and they're expensive to maintain now. But we've got similar but different issues all the way down the line. So, for example, take the Pagoda with its fuel injection pump, mechanical fuel injection pump. There are not many people left that know how to rebuild those to get them working optimally. And for us here in our shop, we've got a handful of our workforce that are trained and know how to set them up once they're back. So it's not just electronics, there are some mechanical components as well. We've had a problem this morning with brake boosters, servo. And we are really struggling to find a company that's going to rebuild these brake boosters for us, because the parts are just getting difficult to find. Somebody has got to put their hand in their pocket and have some tooling made for the rubber diaphragm, for example. Somebody's got to do that. And the other components, there's some sort of Bakelite type components in the brake master cylinder that you can't buy from anywhere anymore. So we're going to have those made.
And then it's like, do you do it? Are people, I guess, with the older stuff that's becoming more valuable, are people quite militant about wanting it to be OEM?
Yes, very much so. And we support that, and I don't blame them for that. But interestingly, if you can't get it, you can't get it. Yes, there's a certain amount of new old stock of parts available, and that's great if you can find that. But if not, and Mercedes, Benz don't supply, even if they do supply, interestingly, we looked at boot locks. So take a Pagoda boot catch. We've got 3 versions on our shelf, all Mercedes-Benz box. One was from the 60s, one was from the 90s, and one is one you can buy now. The same part number, the same exact component. They all look and feel and weigh a different amount.
No way.
Yep. Same component, and I can show you in a minute. So that's interesting. So, and yet there are some reproducers out there that are doing a fantastic job of reproducing some of the components that Mercedes-Benz themselves aren't into producing. And there's nothing wrong with those components and fitting them to your car, but it's just a case of what's the right caliber of component for your car.
Then it gets like, how nerdy do you want to go? How deep? But then if presumably people are like, yeah, but it's original, and then you come out and go, Yes, but we have 3 different original ones made at different times, and they're all different. You're like,
There's a whole level of nerdiness that, yeah.
And then it doesn't come to like certain components. People don't just go, you know what, we can't get any brake boosters or whatever. We'll just swap it out for a modern-esque or more modern part. Is that okay?
Yeah, and that's going to be a tricky one. So, you know, brake booster, I mean, how on earth do you have anything other than the exact same specification that was designed for the car? So that has got to be a rebuild by a professional brake rebuilding firm, you know. There are companies that are remanufacturing some of the service components, you know, different brake discs and you know, those kind of things, and you know, some of the engine electrics are fine to have, you know, rebuilt by a remanufacturer, but there are certain components that have just got to be original or got to be refurbished.
Yeah, and then does that make, presumably there's like time periods where it's actually quite cheap to restore, or affordable was probably a better word, to restore and replace a bunch of parts on a car, but as time goes on, you just can't get parts, or even if you could get parts, they're old and they don't work very well. So you have to send them to a bespoke person to do it. And therefore, like, where are we at now in terms of financially? Is it what's worth doing versus presumably there's a certain year where it's like, yeah, if you really want it, you do it, but it doesn't necessarily make any sense. You know, double the value of the car on the restoration or whatever. Where are we at in that timeline?
Oh, that's interesting, because you've got those 3 models. So you've got, you know, Pagodas, the 60s cars, the pretty ones. Those are absolutely worth doing. They are ferociously expensive to restore, both in terms of labour hours and those parts costs, as you highlight. But it's worth it. And it's interesting, you know, there's a lot of talk at the moment about classic car values, where they're at, are they the right value, and people go back a number of years to when classic cars crashed in the sort of early 90s. I think what was happening then was the value of cars like Pagodas was heavily inflated and bore no relationship at all to the cost of restoration. Right. Now when you look at a Pagoda that is anywhere from sort of 250,000 upwards for a beautifully restored, correct Pagoda, that might feel expensive, but it's going to cost you 200,000 to restore one. Yeah. Because of the labour that's needed, the specialism and the parts. So there's a direct correlation with there. With 107 SL, that's interesting. Some people are restoring those, and if you've got a pretty good car to start with, you can still financially justify a light restoration on a 107 SL. If it's completely rusted through, absolutely not. It doesn't make any financial sense whatsoever to restore one of those, unless, of course, the car's got an emotional pull, or, you know...
But it still doesn't make any financial sense. It's just you've made the call.
Exactly. And if you've got the money to do it, and it was your mum's car from you, or your auntie's car, or your granny's car, or whatever else, then you'll do that. But it doesn't make any financial sense to restore a 107, certainly to, you know, the level that you could go and buy one. When you can buy a very nice one for 50, 60, 70,000 pounds, you can buy a lovely 107 SL. It's going to cost you that and more to restore a bad one. And then with the 129s, they don't rust as much, so rust isn't the issue and labour hours isn't the issue on a 129, but cosmetically, it's hard to make a tired 129 cosmetically nice again. So if you take a 129 that's done sub 30,000 miles and has been nicely looked after, kept in a garage, driven by somebody that is normal weight and height, and that hasn't been abused, it's a lovely interior to be sat in. If you get one that's done 80, 90, 100,000 miles, that's been through a few owners and not been treated correctly in its life, it's very hard to pull that car back and make it as nice as a crisp low mileage car.
What are the difficult things to sort of bring back as such?
Everything from headlinings to door cards to seat. You know, we can replace and recover and retrim all of those components, but they're never quite the same as the car is never quite the same as when it left the factory. And not to the trained eye, it certainly isn't. And you can get away with a bit more of that with the 50s and 60s cars, but it's harder with the 90s cars because there's less tolerance in the materials, in the interior and the gaps and everything else. There's a bit more forgiveness in those 50s and 60s cars.
Yeah, because that's an interesting... I've heard some other people talk about this at one point in time, and it's like the difference between a 0 mileage, let's say 70s car or whatever, whatever brand, and a one that's done 80,000 miles but has just had a full nut and bolt restoration, they're not the same.
No.
And
they're only new ones, I think is the line.
that's
isn't
it, yeah. And unless you literally replace the entire car, you just build a new car.
Yeah. But even when you do that, it's not the same. It's not the same as when
it's not
it
the
left
same
the
as it would
factory.
be.
No.
And you wouldn't get, I guess with a lot of these things, it's you buy an older car for whatever reason, but I think a lot of people buy it to step back in time into that era when that car was made.
Yeah.
So actually, you want to experience it as it was then.
Yeah.
And then someone like myself is like, yeah, but the brakes don't work, so can we make it stop better? And then you're like, where do we go?
Don't get me wrong, it takes an experienced or a trained eye or whatever it might be. You've got to really, really know the model and understand the difference between driving one that's been fully restored and one that's completely original. And there's subtle differences. There are really subtle differences, but there are differences.
Yeah. Yeah. I get you. And then ultimately, depending on how the values shift on a zero mileage car needs a lot of money spending on it if you want to drive it. Yeah. Then there's that bit where it's been driven a little bit, but can hopefully consistently winner. Yeah. And then there's the one that's done 200,000 miles and everything's completely destroyed.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting with 107s. So we've got that huge age range of when they were manufactured and lots of cars that passed through our doors. Interestingly with those, because they were so well made, if you get one of those that has been properly and correctly serviced, properly stored, properly looked after, you can drive one of those with 70 or 80,000 miles that drives exactly the same as one with 5,000 miles. Right. As long as it's been properly looked after. But of course, what happened was these cars, they sort of dipped, didn't they, in terms of their interest and their value. They fell into the wrong hands. They weren't necessarily always properly maintained. Yeah. And because they are so robust, they can withstand abuse. So one of these cars can withstand many, many years without servicing and soldier on. Yeah. Bushes, engine bushes, engine mounting, subframe bushes on the front. We get customers come up here and we'll sort of say, well, you might want to think about those subframe bushes and engine mounts. Oh, it's fine, the car drives fine. Well, go and try that one. Go and drive that one that's just had new subframe bushes and tell me the difference. And they come back and they say, don't care what it costs, just do it. Because, of course, they've got no reference point, have they? Yeah, they just think this car drives quite nicely. They don't realise that with knackered subframe mounts, the car, it just doesn't go over bumps nicely at all.
Do you think that's one of them? It must be an advantage in selling, but also just an advantage of like a site like you've got now with the variety of cars you've got on site is someone can come in and you can go, well, look, you can go and drive a pretty much identical car to yours, but in a better or worse or whatever condition, drive around the block and they can go, oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, I didn't realize that mine was awful. Or actually, no, mine's quite good.
The most rewarding thing, the most rewarding trick, and it takes about 10 quid and 5 minutes, is on the 280 SLs. That's a straight six twin cams, the same engine they used in the 123 and those taxis all those years, and hugely, hugely popular engine. And the throttle linkage has got a white plastic bush. Right. And what happens is that bush wears out and eventually drops out. So everybody knows that these old Mercs have got quite a lot of travel on the throttle. You don't expect to have amazing throttle response on an old Merc, you just don't. Yeah. But when this bush wears and when it drops out, there's almost nothing at all for ages. So the pedal goes down and down and down and down, and then all of a sudden the engine decides to come into life. So somebody will come out there, we'll open the bonnet, we'll look at this bush, we'll change it for them and say, go and drive that now. And it's as if they've got twice the horsepower. It's just, oh my word. So
and I imagine that works in both directions as well.
Absolutely.
Like when you lift off, it's it's a bit lazy to sort of come off.
There's no engine braking, and so that's quite a fun trick.
Are there any other sort of super simple, great things for any of the particular generations?
There's loads. We could be here all day. There's lots of kind of stuff like that. In particular with pagodas, for example, they've got a complex throttle linkage, and that's connected, of course, to the ignition system, the injection system, and also how the car changes gear. So again, same thing. Somebody will come in a pagoda that they've only ever owned one, or they've owned it for many years, and they think it drives great, and we'll sort of, one of the techs will take it for a test drive and go, doesn't change gear in where it should and how it should. customers, oh, it's fine, it drives fine. Again, we'll do the same, try this, we'll change the setup, we'll change the linkage. Oh my word, the car drives beautifully, it changes gear beautifully, it's exactly as it should, it's more responsive, it's faster, it's more enjoyable to drive. Yeah, so there's each of the cars have got its own form.
It is really difficult, that one, and as someone that gets to drive a bunch of different cars every now and then, generally newer stuff, if it's new or just being built or something, I'm like, well, this is how it sort of should be. But I've driven a few things recently that it's like, go drive this car, and they've been reasonably low mileage, but older. And actually looking back on it, I'm like, well, I have no idea whether that's a good version of that car or a bad version of that car, or it's been sat in a shed for 10 years, and like the experience I'm getting on that day, I have no idea. Is it representative at all of what it should drive like? And that is really tricky. Even just simple things like whether it's alignment and all the brakes bled properly and stuff like that, and the difference a nice alignment, not a nice alignment, a correct alignment makes on a car.
Yeah, the wheel's just pointing in the right direction.
Point in the right direction. Like, that's really quite relaxing. As soon as you're fighting it all the time, it's like a complete game changer. What's your favourite? Do you have a favourite kind of one of the era that you sort of sell?
That's a tricky question because there is always an example or always a vehicle that passes through here that I fall in love with almost on a weekly basis. So, and each of the three sort of models that we tend to specialise in has got its own place. Pagodas are beautiful, and they're just a lovely place to be sat on the right day with that nice white steering wheel and looking down the bonnet at those old clocks in front of you. Absolutely fantastic. But a 107, of course, is just that bit more practical. You can cruise at a higher speed. It's the gearing's a little bit nicer for longer distance cruising, a little bit more comfortable, a few more creature comforts, and still admired, still a great car to be sat behind, just a little bit more practical to use every day. And then you get in a 129 and you think, blimey, in its day, you drive a 500, an early 500, 300 odd horsepower, torquey engine. It just feels like the perfect car for its era, and you can get seduced into owning one of those as well. So,
I find it. I look at certain eras, and the thing that always sort of throws me is because, let's say, with the early SLs, what is it, our 107, it's quite a classic shape. But then you start to look at the interior, and you're like, no, that's very of the time, and it's not like a classic interior, whereas if you go back to 50s, 60s or whatever, they have all these like nice wooden dashes with big cages and stuff. As soon as things get in that 70s, 80s, 90s period, my brain goes like, well, that's not classic. That is now 50 years ago. But it is that different look. And I think, presumably over time, my perception of that will change. But it is interesting to me that how my brain just goes, oh yeah, but that's like a 70s car, not a classic car, even though it is.
And then where's it going to? What will be a classic going forward? Is 129 really a classic? Is it the last of the classics? When you go to the R230, the next shape, you think of all of those models that are around, the early 55 AMG. Is that like to become a classic? Possibly. They did that F1 version with slightly different winglets on the front bumper, and I think a few more horsepower from memory. That could be an interesting car to keep as part of a collection. Are they classics or not? Who knows?
Or did they make too many of them, and then there's just a bazillion around?
Yeah, that's the trouble. Yeah.
But then it's also like, I haven't followed sort of Mercedes as a brand for long enough, but over time, there's certain models that now people look at and go, whether it's Pagodas, 300 SL, whatever, all that sort of stuff.
It's a generational thing as well, isn't it? So if you think about it, so I'm 50 next year. I remember walking to school, looking at E30 BMWs, 964 Porsches, 107 SLs. Those were my dreamy, aspirational poster kind. Well, other than F40 and those kind of things. Those were the sort of aspirational cars at the time. So as somebody like me who's middle-aged maybe gets to have the space or the funds to buy a third car or a toy car, what do? We go to that nostalgia era, don't we? Perhaps the folks who are in their 60s and 70s, they go back to the sort of cars, the post-war cars, the 40s, 50s cars. What's next? Because are the generation after me going to look to 90s and noughties cars and think they're 100%. Classics? But will that be more Jap stuff? Because because I guess we're all doing computer games and
the sort of PlayStation cars in inverted commas, whether it's Skylines and all this sort of stuff, are already going boom, 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 boom. And I find it really difficult looking at the cars, because if I just just ignore everything I've accumulated over the last 15 years of being in this space, and go, what would you go, that is a significant car to me? Whatever that is, probably is going to be worth something in, let's say, plus 10 years, because all the people around me, even the real extreme car nuts, yes, okay, but there's not too many really super hardcore, nerdy, extreme. You've got to find exactly the right car for that sort of stuff. But what's the general vibe? What are people wanting to buy? And then where we'll be able to drive these things. I think we'll be able to drive.
I think so too.
For a while.
Yeah. But I think it's the size of the population that's going to be interested in it. So my youngest has just started university, and we had a bit of a summer party with him and his pals came around, and we started talking about cars.
Yeah.
Now, I know that a number of years ago, lads talking about cars would be interested in who'd got what, who was souping up what, who was putting horsepower in what, who put a spoiler kit on and big stereo and all that sort of stuff. I would say less than a quarter, about 20 lads there, and less than a quarter of them were really interested in cars. Then there was a few folks in the middle that sort of liked supercars and those kind of things. And then there was some of the other sort of part of that population at the time. I'm only talking 20 lads. Didn't give a shit. They just felt like, and some of them weren't even bothered taking their test. They were just cars were just a means to get, or are a means just to get where they need to be. But there's other ways of doing that. So we've got this sort of taper effect, haven't we, of people that are interested in cars, I think.
Yeah, I think so.
And what does that mean to where a classic car ends? It could be that cars, this Jap cars that we were just talking about, that could be the last really of classic cars, because the rest of them are either going to be recycled or nobody's going to be interested.
Yeah. But then you look at, I love the era of sort of 2000s to about 2014 maybe. I really like, there's a lot of cars in that era that I really like, because it was sort of, whether it could be race cars that were racing at the time, things I played in video games, supercars that I sort of looked at that came out, and then there's things that have come out whilst I've been in the space that I go, but that was really cool. But loads of those cars have already done a big jump, so it's not like there's any bargains around anywhere.
And you are a petrol head.
Yeah.
But I think, the people that own these cars, the people that own these SLs, and the people we get through here, they're interested in cars, but they're not necessarily pure petrol heads.
No.
Do you know what I mean? They remember them, and the vehicles are used either or bought because of nostalgia, or they're used for Sunday trips or tours
and they want
whatever else.
A nice car that brings back some memories or whatever.
What you're talking about there is your specific interest and knowledge in a certain car that was produced for a certain reason. Yeah.
Which is so far down the rabbit hole. And I do find it funny if I go to a house party or whatever, something, and meet some other people, and you're like, everyone invariably goes Sam's into cars, and then you talk to people, and I kind of just try and get it out early, are you into cars? And they're like, yeah, I like cars. And you're like, okay, let's gauge where on the spectrum we are.
I do the same.
It's I don't want to come in and be with some super niche random stuff and just go, well, this is pretty weird. Do you like Porsches? And they're like, yeah. I just bought insert some model code. Okay. Yeah, I'll pitch it at that level. But it is a declining thing, and because I'm in the space all the time, it's very easy to assume that everyone cares, at all, and then it is quite almost worrying and refreshing when you go out into a general mix of population and no one could care less. They just don't care at all. They're like, I have a car. Like, okay, that's interesting.
I've got a story of a customer who's got a big collection of cars, and his daughter was going to prom a few months ago. And what car does she want to go to prom in? Bear in mind, this guy's got over 20 cars and some really nice stuff. A Tesla. She wanted to turn up at a prom in the Tesla.
That is interesting.
That's where we are.
It is where we are. And then that factor for younger people, climate and whatnot and all that sort of stuff, it's going to be more important for them than it is for us, and then for the people before us. And if you're like 90 now, actually lots of people will look at their grandchildren and go, well, I want them to have a nice life. But lots of people also apparently in Texas don't give a shit. Yeah. So you said that you've done a bit of racing.
Yeah, a little bit of club racing.
What have you dabbled in?
Mazdas. So I've always been an early MX-5 fan. I had a few of them, when I was starting all of this, dabbling around. I just think they're amazing cars, and it's pretty much the most affordable way to go circuit racing. So I did the old Palmer Sport Day for my 40th, and enjoyed that. I did a couple of track days in some old Beamers that I had over the years, and had some coaching and tuition and stuff like that. And then thought, okay, let's go for it. So got the Mark 1 Mazda, and my son at the time had just turned 16, so he got one as well, so we kind of went racing together. So it was just a boys weekend together, which is great fun because, as you know, because I know you've done a little bit of racing, it's as much about probably the weekend actually as it is about what you do on the track, because it's a bloody frustrating sport, and it's an easy way to burn cash as well at the same time, isn't it? So started with the Mark 1s, had some fun in those, and then that was with the BRSCC, that's the club, and then went into the Mark 3s, which is a different driving experience again, had some great fun with those. And then a couple of years ago, I think just sort of pre-pandemic, tried Caterham as well. Oh, okay. So I jumped into the Caterham, jumped into a 310R and had a few rounds in that, had some fun in that, crashed that and made a mess of that at Croft. So trying too hard.
Was that, I've not raced Caterham, but I've driven some Caterhams and whatnot, and I've did a little bit of racing in a Mark 1 MX-5, which the Mark 1 MX-5 I just found slightly frustrating. I think dropping in to like a slightly random team, and for me, I didn't know whether my car was like half decent. And it seems like in that space, like 1 horsepower is the difference between good and rubbish. And just being like, no, I think I got a really good exit onto this straight, and the guy in front got a really bad one, and they're just pulling away, and you're like, no. So we did a few races, and then it's like, the guys I was doing it with, they were like, either we're buying a car, or we're approaching this in a different way, because
you never know, do you?
You don't want to get like, the racing is so close. That I remember seeing one of he was the guy that was sort of owned the team that we were getting a car from. He was racing in Mark 3s, and he came back in and was like, new engine. Just like, swap this engine.
Wasn't Brian Chandler, was it?
He was like, whatever, a tenth off the pace he wanted to be, and he was like, just swap it out, put a different one in. Because like, it's that close, isn't it?
It is that close, yeah. I think I told you just before we started the chat that the last time I raced at Brands in the Mark III, I was 6/10 off pole in quali and put me 18th on the grid, which is a little bit soul destroying. You think you're a handy driver, you're only 6/10 off the fastest bloke in the country, and you're 18th on the grid. So
and lots of people do it for season upon season upon season
season.
So I think I slightly naively came in and thought, we'd be all right at this. And then you realise you're like, no, doing all right is somewhere near the back.
Well, it was interesting when I went into the Caterhams, because everybody sort of turns their nose up at Mazda drivers. What do they know? And they're slow and whatever else. But of course, I was used to carrying corner speed and going into a corner 3 abreast. That was fine for me. So of course I joined as this oik from the Mazdas, and did reasonably well. Didn't do that well actually, but could have if I'd put a bit more time into it. But that's racing driver excuses, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've got to get them out there, don't you? Get them out early. No, I think I've had some funny experiences on whether it's like test days and stuff of meeting different people driving different cars. And one guy. There is a lot of like, I think if you're fresh and you've just come in, at whatever level you've picked, you always look down at the people below you, not necessarily, but like I think people sort of go, well, no, the people that drive that car must be rubbish because it's not as fast as my car. And chatting to various people, I was chatting to someone in a Ferrari Challenge. He just bought like a 488 Challenge, and I was like, oh, so I was there. I got a rat. Actually, no, I think at the time I was in a C1, and we were banging around, and then I'm pretty sure at one point I overtook someone in like, I think it was a challenge car. Like, how? I've got like 67 horsepower, but then you're just like, well, flat out, never lift, or like lift a little bit and just,
That's
on the door
great.
handles.
I know exactly what you're saying there. The amount of track days we've done, like just sort of testing the car a little bit in the Mazdas, and obviously we're doing reasonable lap times in them. Not that you time on a track day, of course, but we've got a reasonable pace on.
You've got timing in the car.
No, clearly not. But you've got a reasonable pace on, and then there's the Ferraris there and AMGs there and this, that, and the other, and sort of looking at this little 4-cylinder fart box, and it's kind of doing them through every corner.
And then also, I mean, a huge part of it, one, it's obviously experience in driving the cars or whatever, but it's like level of commitment.
Yeah.
If you're in a race car, full stop, doesn't matter what the race car is, you're committed. I'm so much more committed, and I know it can go in the gravel.
Yeah.
Don't want to put it in the gravel, but like if it goes in the gravel, it's not going to die.
Yeah.
You just put a bit of tape, whatever, it'll go back together. But you put your shiny new supercar in the gravel, like that's a really, really bad day. Yeah. And the difference between, like you talking about being whatever it was, like 0.6 off, that is nothing on a track.
Yeah.
Like absolutely nothing. It's less, probably at most tracks, it's less than a tenth a corner.
Yes.
And when you look at it like that, you're like, oh, okay, that's a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. And then someone thinks they're going fast, and then you put a pro in or something, and they're like, oh no, they're like 10 seconds a lap faster. You're like, oh, okay. Oh, like the differential between someone who knows what they're doing, even in the same car, I think most people have this perception. If you've not done any track driving, you're like, yeah, I mean, I should be able to get within a couple of seconds. Yeah. And then it's like 15 seconds or something, or 20. I think my first race in a Radical, I think I was like 15 seconds, like 10 plus or something off the pace. You're like, I don't understand. Like that, when you go past someone doing that sort of lap time, it's almost like they're going backwards. Yeah. Like,
but then it's like any other sport, isn't it? So you can probably quickly find most of that time,
100%.
And then finding that last little bit, so frustrating. And that's probably like golf. I don't play golf, but I imagine it's the same with whatever kind of sport you're into. Finding that last little bit is just so frustrating.
And it is quite a good sport that you can come in at pretty much whatever age, unless you're like blind or something, and then. Even then, some people do drive blind. But you can gain a huge percentage of like the time in not that long if you've got, if you commit the money, but the time into driving, and you can get within, let's say, that second in something like a Mazda, probably not in an LMP1 car. Whereas if I went to a track and started sprinting, it's just not not happening at all, is it? Yeah. So, you guys you've got a track prep.
Yep.
SL.
Yeah. You've just looked at it out the window there. Yeah.
You do. Is that sort of fun for the team and?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a 450. We're going to put it in the HSCC. So it's a 78 450 manual. So we've raced it a couple of times in a couple of series. We've raced at Anglesey, we've raced at Donington, and had some great fun in it. But it's not something necessarily that I've been too involved with, because I haven't had the time, and as you say, it's been really a promotional vehicle that the boys have fun. We take the lads on a track day, the techs go on a track day, and have a bit of fun and see if they can sort of squeeze a bit more out of the performance of the car. We really need to put the car on a diet if we're going to win anything in its class, because it's got the horsepower and it's got the reliability, but we need to chop some weight out of it where we can, and then I think the HSCC get a little bit funny about what we can and can't modify. And
what sort of things did that race against?
Probably things like 911s, 924s, Capris, Yeah, those kind of sort of, well, there was some quite good saloon cars in the day, wasn't there? And Dolomite Sprints, I think, are pretty handy at that sort of era. TVRs, Lotus, Lotus Elans and stuff like that.
And was the SL pretty handy back in the day?
No.
No.
It's so soft. It's like a barge. It just, you can literally put the kettle on down the straight. It's just lovely. But it's forgiving as well. It's really forgiving.
Yeah.
So you can hustle it through the bends and across the curbs beautifully.
Right to those curbs like nothing
exactly.
else. Yeah.
Some of the more delicate cars are sort of bouncing them onto your wheels, and that just boom, boom, straight over there.
Yeah, and I guess ultimately, it's about having fun.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
If you're racing, you're not exactly getting a massive paycheck at the end of the race. It's just, did you enjoy it? Yeah. And probably good for you guys to have an SL and a bit of racing and whatnot.
And what it does, it helps us develop the road car stuff that we do. Right. So we do a lot of this, we call it our sport line. So what we've been doing there is we've been looking at different ways of developing the suspension, from just taking out some of the body roll that these cars have got through to making them, drive a lot more like a modern car in terms of the way that the car handles. In addition, we've been sort of doing some manual gearbox conversions, I think I mentioned that earlier, and upgrading the engines as well in terms of, some of the old-fashioned ways of tuning an old engine, as well as changing them to throttle bodies and electronic ignition and those kind of things. So we've got a range of aspects for a growing niche of customers. We talked about who's into them nowadays. We've got quite a few customers that don't always want them exactly as they left the factory. Yeah. They want them just to drive and handle a little bit more with a modern sort of feel, really. I guess if I use the word resto mod, that would be cheap and exaggerating. But I think we're down that. We've certainly put a lot of effort into our sort of premium resto mod ourselves. But really, the opportunities for our customers to say, well, I want it to look the same, or I want it to look different. I want it to handle pretty much the same. I just want it to take some roll out of it, or I really want it to be on point. When I'm doing my dash across Wales or, the Black Forest or wherever it is there might be.
Do you notice a difference in the customers for the different sort of spectrum of that? Like whether it's like an age type of person, or is it all just massively varies? It
varies. I mean, yes, there is obviously the younger of our client base tends to be more into this kind of stuff and more into 129 and those kind of things. But I think it just depends on the reason why the person owns the car more than anything, and they'll usually own a number of cars. Somebody that has one of these, say 107s, and then decides to do some sport line upgrades on it, it probably won't be their only car. They'll probably have a number of other cars as well, and that's the way of the world now, isn't it, with folks and what they have in their garages.
Yeah, and I think my journey's sort of been modern cars, and then it's split into slightly older. And then in that older car experience, I kind of wanted not a modern car experience in an older car, but I didn't want to just buy something from the 70s and it to be mechanically identical to something from the 70s. So I've got a resto-modded SC. Yeah. But now I think I'm a bit further down the rabbit hole. And I'm like, actually, I'd quite like something from the 60s, and I would be reasonably happy if it drove exactly like it did or very similar. For me, things have always got to work though. Like, I remember talking to someone who was doing Jags, and they're like, some people get really funny about, let's say it was like a fuel pump or something, and they're like, they want the original, and you're like, and it just doesn't work.
Yeah, exactly,
Or like the injection or something just like didn't work. Like it's going to leave you on the side of a motorway, especially if you don't drive it all day. And then, I think that's an interesting split of, do you actually drive it?
Yes. Yeah, and that's the first question we'll ask a new customer, whether they're looking to buy a car from us or bring their car to us for any work at all, really. We'll sort of have that consultation with them to say, right, how long have you owned it? How have you used it? And how do you plan on using it? What's important to you? So that we can, really help them, particularly in terms of service or restoration, help them put the right money to the right place. Because typically what happens, you'll get one of us blokes turns up and says, right, I need some new chrome, I need some new paint, I mean my wheels refurbishing. Yeah. And we'll go, okay, that's fine, but how are you going to use it? What have you done till now? When's the last time you had this done? Where are you planning to go on it? And have you checked that? And have you checked that? And then we maybe have the chat about the subframe bushes, or we'll look at the fuel lines and they're corroded, or we'll look at the brake lines and they're bulging, and we'll say, well, That's so fine. You know, we can do all the cosmetic things, of course, but in terms of reliability and in terms of enjoyment of the vehicle, there's some things here you might want to consider as well. And then that's their choice as to whether they do all of that or some of that.
How far they go down. That's something I'm interested in more and more now as some of my cars get a bit older and they start going out of whether it's warranty or whatever. And when they're generally being worked on by a manufacturer, you don't actually necessarily get a long list. I would love for all of my cars, like for the manufacturer to give me a list of every part on the car and what mileage / usage it probably should be changed. And then I can look into the future and go, this is what's going to happen. But you do quite an extensive list when a car, or can do, comes in of things that might come up, etc., don't you?
That's right, yeah, we do a health check. So we do various types of checks from just purely corrosion through to the engine wiring looms, for example, that I told you about, where the cables are degrading. But sort of most popular service that we offer is a full day's health check on the car that, you know, does every aspect of the car. It's an 8-page report, and then we sit down and give the patient the news. Well, not the patient, but the family member the news. But that then starts that journey with the customer. It starts that relationship. They've really got to know their car, and it might be that they've owned it for a number of years and they've just maybe neglected it. It might be that it's been looked after by the wrong person, or it might be that they've just bought the car. So it's quite fun to be at a classic car auction and see a couple of Mercs go through, and then usually on the Monday we'll get the call for the health check. So I just bought this car recently, and I think I was in the hall. I watched it go through on the block, and then, you know, if we're lucky, we'll get to do the health check on the car, and we get a new customer that way. So it's great for us.
Do you see more issues? This is slightly odd topic, but with E10 fuel and.
Yeah. I mean, I think there was, you know, we looked into that a lot. We looked into the caliber of the quality of the fuel lines and fuel tanks and everything that were in the vehicles that we specialise in, and we were pretty comfortable and pretty happy that just putting E5 in was going to be enough. And then you get the section of the community that's saying, well, that's going to cost me more to run, but how many miles do you actually do? And when you actually put it through a calculator, it might cost you an extra £100 a year or whatever to put super in it. I've always put super in my old cars anyway, so didn't really see it as a biggie.
It's a member of the family recently, her car's like died, and I was like, did you put E10 in it? She was like, what? I just put the fuel in. Like, there must actually be a significant portion of the UK now that one has no idea that it's changed, and then have just kind of nuked some of their cars.
Wrong oils in the over the years contributes to premature engine wear, and in particular in Pagodas when they start, they are very rich when they're on cold start. Seriously rich, and the engine takes a long time to settle down and find its right level of mixture.
Right.
And consequently, if a Pagoda has been stop-started a lot over the years, engine will wear prematurely, and it will be an expensive job to do. And they're particularly susceptible to that, Pagodas are.
Interesting. Yeah, that's something I always try and remind myself, especially now that I've got an EV. Again, the EV, you just get flat. Doesn't matter. Nothing's warming up. You're ready to go. But just letting things be. So I normally wrap these up with 5 questions, which are at the top here. Do you have a most memorable driving trip or journey?
I've got 2. One is with my fairly new partner, 2019. We went around Italy, and we had a lot of fun in that. We went in an AMG. And I'm lucky that she's a petrol head, and I'm lucky that she doesn't mind speed. In fact, she actually positively likes us to go fast. And I feel a little bit daft telling you the story, but you've asked me the question, so I'm going to tell you now anyway. But we were in the bottom of Italy, making our way up to Turin, across that wine region there, across that part of the world. And you probably know Italian road signs are a nightmare. They're small, they're difficult to read. So you've got the sat-nav telling you to kind of go the straight road, the dual carriage, whatever else. I've got a map, and the night before I've tried to work out which way I want to go across the Alps and whatever else. And I'm looking at signs, and we're a bit confused, and I'm pulled over by the side of the road, and a 911 convertible Italian comes past. I'm like, oh, hello. And so we followed and caught up, and we had about 50 kilometres of an alpine road and we were both of us doing speeds we shouldn't have been doing.
Yeah.
We were wrong side of the road. We were literally as if we were on the racetrack together. Adrenaline like I've never had on the road, and I think it will be a trip I'll never forget. Get to the end, T-junction at the end. He turns right, thumbs up, off we go, great time sort of thing. So that's one I'll never forget. My partner actually put the chair forwards and got her feet braced on the dashboard. We braked so hard that our glasses fell off into one of the corners. So that was I've not told many people that story.
It's funny the sort of little relationship, I don't know if that's the quite right word, but you can build with another car in another place on the right road. You have like 20 minutes and you're like...
There's a body language in the car, isn't there, sometimes? And
like an acknowledgement that like you're there, I'm there, we're having fun.
So I've got that one, and then Scotland, Highlands, on my own. Sadly, after I lost my father 10 years ago, had a little BMW Z M Coupe at the time. And after the funeral and everything else, just went up and just cleared my head. So I just went up for a week up in the Highlands driving that car. And my word, I mean, there's some amazing roads in the Alps. You know, I'm a motorcyclist as well, so I've spent a lot of time across the French, Italian Alps and Switzerland and even Slovenia and places like that. So there's some amazing roads. But for me, the Scottish Highlands are just
it's a cool place.
Sublime driving over there, up there, sorry.
It is, and there's something about being in the UK that's like, for me, it's really kind of chilled. There's just like zero stress. Not quite the same level of zero stress as when you're in Italy and you're just not that bothered about police and stuff like that.
They don't seem to care, do they? I mean, the same trip, the Porsche trip I was just telling you about, we were on the motorway and following one of those Audi A7s with the big engines, and we were well over 100 miles an hour for a long stretch of time, and we overtook a policeman, and I'm on the brakes thinking, I'm going to jail. And the Audi just kept going, so I thought, well, if you're going, I'm going, and the police just didn't seem to be bothered. We were doing like 120 or something. It's
so odd, that feeling, and it only happens in certain countries, certain times when you're like, no, I think this is okay. They seem to be fine with this here, and like you're in. There's a certain section of motorway I think that comes along the coast from Italy down to like Monaco, and it's a really fast bit of motorway that goes through some tunnels. And everyone on that road is driving pretty fast. And if you're in sports cars, you're always going through the tunnels.
Of course you do. You got to get the windows down, haven't you? You just have to.
It's pretty awesome. If you could only drive one car for the rest of your life, a sports car, what would it be?
Oh, that's a great question. You could have given me some advance notice on this, because I've just got about 10 cars.
Yeah, but that's the whole point.
Flash through my head. Sports car, one car only. It'd probably be a 911.
On what 911?
996 GT3. I said in a while ago, and when we started chatting, for me that sort of late 90s was the last of real analog driving cars with no turbocharging, no driver aids. I could probably give you 10 if I'm honest, but that one's come to the surface right now, so we'll go with that one.
Does that particularly stand out because of where you were in your life when it came out, or this is now you're looking back and going, I feel like that's quite good?
I just think that's the sweet spot.
I drove a 996 GT3 for the first time in America very recently, and I have a 997, and I definitely feel like actually at the time, like now, it feels like good value.
Yes.
A 996 GT3, they're not insane money.
No.
You've still got that engine. It's not as fast, but you know, you can't go that fast anymore.
No, exactly, and that's the thing, isn't it? You know, you and I both drive big horsepower daily cars.
Which is completely stupid.
Yeah, and you think to yourself, I mean, for me, the sweet spot is 300 horsepower. I don't think on the road, if you know how to pedal, you don't need any more than 300 horsepower.
Depends on the weight of the car.
Good point. Good point. That's a very good point, of course.
You've got a Caterham.
Yeah. Well, that's it. We only need 150 really in a Caterham day. Yeah.
I had actually one of my best drives was in a 310R road car in like wet, dampy, crappy conditions on some small roads, and like that was way more than enough power in just a small thing. And
well, that's what I raced. I raced a 310.
That feels like a really good place in the range in terms of you can put your foot down and
It's about noise as well, isn't it? Noise is so important,
So
I think.
important.
So important to this, yeah.
Yeah, super key. What do you think is the most undervalued car at the moment? What should be worth more?
I think E46 M3s should be more than they are.
Yeah.
I'm not just saying it because I own one, but I think an E39 M5 as well. I think I just saw Munich Legend sold one for 90.
Ooh.
Yeah, super low mileage thing. For the Mercs, I think the 107s have still got a way to go because they are so usable. Their appeal is huge. 129s we talked about, the very early 129s, the very first of the line 500s. They've got a slightly different look and a slightly different feel about them. I think they've got a way to go. When
I look at that space, yeah, definitely the 107s. For me, that look, I really like that look. Yeah, it's an interesting. Right, what's the most interesting car to you at the moment? What are you Googling, looking up?
Oh, I can tell you this one straight away. It's the new C63.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, because I've been drooling over that new M3 touring for a couple of years as they've been doing the teaser shots, and I just thought, I like my old BMWs, and it's got the big arches, and I'm thinking, oh, that would be an interesting car, and I like a wagon, of course. And then that C63's come on the scene, hasn't it, with like a gazillion horsepower and the electric motor and this, that and the other. And I'm thinking, I can't work out whether I absolutely hate the idea of it or I just think it is just so complex and fascinating what they've seemed to have done with this 4-cylinder, near 500 horsepower engine and then like another couple hundred horsepower
or something.
Yeah, with the electric motor. I cannot wait to sort of listen and look at the road tests and whatever else on those, and might even own one, I don't know, but...
That's it. It's a really interesting split because I think that engine is quite interesting.
Yeah.
And I think when they put that engine in like a Lotus Emira, it will be really quite something. But for me, a C63, and maybe this immediately just becomes like, I'm now an older person. For me, a C63 has got to have a big V8 in it. And like, if you put a highly strung 4-cylinder in my E-Class, that to me, you don't know until you drive it. But I don't think it would feel like the right engine for the car. Like this at the same time, if that car had like some sort of super revvy GT3-esque engine in it, it's not the engine for the car. It needs to have lots of torque and kind of burble along. And I wonder if a lot of the buyers buy them because they want the big V8, or they buy them because it's the 63 and it's the top one. It'd be interesting to see how it...
Well, that's the point. You said, what's the most interesting car? I'm with you. I'm a petrolhead and I love 8 cylinders and, or multi-cylinder cars. But it's fascinating. It's fascinating to see how that car is going to drive and how that technology is going to integrate and what feeling. Yeah, it's over 2 tons, isn't it? Like 2.2.
2.3.
Oh, is it 2.3? Yeah.
I think it's either 3 or 400 kilos. I think it might be 300 kilos. Heavier than the old one.
My son was telling me that it's got some feature on the head-up display that when you go around a track, it will give you the
it'll give you a sort of
the line. It'll give you a ghost car.
Yeah.
Is it a ghost car in front of you to follow?
Nice.
That's cool, isn't it?
That is fun.
That's cool. Yeah.
I like that sort of stuff. Like I do like tech and like interesting ways of.
And then he took the piss out of me. He said, "You still wouldn't be able to hit an apex, Dad." So, yeah, I put his rent up.
Yeah, exactly. And you won't if you can't afford to go on a track.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
5-car garage, unlimited value.
Gullwing, F40. Not have thought about this, of course.
Yeah, I feel like you have thought about this.
Gullwing, F40, E-Type coupe, early E-Type coupe.
Yeah.
One I'm up to 3. And let's have any motorbikes in there or not? No, it's got to be cars. Right, let's stick with cars. I'd have to have a Pagoda.
Right. So you'd have a Pagoda and a Gullwing. I know one's got a roof and one doesn't.
Yeah. I just would, I just would. And then I'd probably have something interesting 4x4-y, but I don't know enough about them. But I think I'd have to own some Range Rover or Urus or Bentley or one of those. I think you just have to, wouldn't you? Yeah. Oh, hang on a minute. Can I change my mind? Can I have a 911 in there somewhere? Can I have a
Yeah,
singer?
I mean, most
I'll tell you
people
what I'm
will
going to do. I'm going to have a singer. Forget the 4x4, bollocks to that.
Yeah.
I'm going to have a singer.
And which singer?
I just
Do you have a classic?
Yeah, I think so.
DLS?
Maybe a DLS, but it might be too much for me. As long as it was exquisite,
That's it, yeah.
I don't think I'd care, because I think I'd just be looking at it really more than anything. But
I love when people have gone into some serious details on like bits of interior and whatever, and you just sit in it and you look around and go, this is really nice. Like, I don't even have to turn it on. It's just a cool thing to look at. I would love that in my house.
Yeah.
To have like, you know, one of those glass boxes that you can either look through the floor or like that sort of thing would be super cool. Right, well, thanks very much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for coming to see us.
Yeah, and probably have a little wander around.
No dramas. Nice to see you.